Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where in the world you are joining me from. I am 𝐂𝐎𝐍, and this is the Crypto and Cognac podcast show. As always, live every Thursday, 7 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time sharp, right here where YouTube. Guys, season 7, episode 2. And like I told you guys, this season we're going to do things a little bit differently, right? We've been doing the podcast for the past 6 seasons, and we have focused primarily on crypto, blockchain, but it is the Crypto and Cognac podcast show. So this season, I want to start touching a little bit more on the Cognac side of the podcast. Why? Because of late, a lot of people have been, people outside of the crypto space have been coming up on the podcast. And, the question that I always get is, okay, I get it, crypto, but why Cognac, right? And yes, crypto and Cognac has a nice little ring to it, but that isn't the only reason for the podcast. So this season, we're going to get into a little bit more about that. And starting this evening, I am going to tell you guys how the name, the Crypto and Cognac podcast came to be in the first place. But we have some things we have to get out of the way. As always, the ICE rule. I am not a financial advisor. This is not a financial advisory podcast. Nothing that I say here this evening, next evening, the evenings that have gone should be misconstrued as financial advice, right? The same way that we have our Hennessy, the same way we have our crypto talk. Information, conversation, education, right? Always about the ICE rule. This evening, again, I'm having my favorite Hennessy VSOP, initially created for the King of England. And this happens to be my favorite expression of Hennessy. Not the cheapest, not the most expensive, but definitely by a tiny margin, my favorite. So as always, guys, cheers, pull up a glass, sip something, and let's talk about it, right? As always, don't forget to drink, drive, and degen responsibly. So cheers. So how did the Crypto and Cognac podcast show come to be? So like I've told this story a few times, how I got back into crypto initially in DeFi summer 2020, fell down the rabbit hole very, very hard. During that time, I was consuming a lot of crypto content. And some of my favorites, Ivan on Tech, Crypto Casey, who else was a big initial influence? Oh my God, his name is just slipping me right now. Anyway, I'll get back to that. But Andreas Antonopoulos, huge influence on my initial deep dives into crypto, into blockchain, into Bitcoin. And, one of the things that Elio Trades was another big one. But what kept coming up to me is that oftentimes these guys, not oftentimes, always, these guys talked about crypto and blockchain, particularly from the perspective of the North American and European market. And they were basically speaking to the North American and European market. Obviously, that's where they're from. That is their community. So they were speaking from that perspective. And I always found that it was interesting that I had to go and do so much heavy lifting on my own to make it relatable to my experience here in the Caribbean. So as I got deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, I started thinking about, how do I give back to this community of blockchain, crypto? How do I add value in this space, this nascent space? And that's when I started toying around with the idea of doing a podcast, started researching about podcasts, started trying to figure out what this opportunity, what this experience would look like. And two things kept coming up: that if you were gonna start a podcast, you needed to be willing to stick it out, right? And in order to do so successfully, you had to make your podcast about something that you were excited about, knowledgeable about to some extent, or have access to knowledgeable people, and something that you were passionate about. And for me, I'd already bitten the bug as it relates to crypto, and I was super excited about it. I didn't know how long I would be excited about it. I didn't know if I would, another crash would happen and I would lose my interest. But I felt like, I was sufficiently excited at the time to take that step into this space as it relates to blockchain and crypto. And you guys know I founded a company called Crypto Caribbean. And it was really around bringing awareness and advocacy to the blockchain space in the Caribbean. I started talking more in conferences, being a go-to speaker about blockchain in the Caribbean. But something that always came up whenever I go to conferences, especially within the region, is that despite all the formalities in the conference, all the talking points that took place during the conference, the real conversations happened in the cocktail mixers and the after events and the limes, because obviously as Caribbean people, that is when we actually coming to our own. That's when we really start opening up, expressing, when we end up more social setting. And it was at that point where I was like, you know what, it couldn't be a regular podcast, because that's not how we do things in the Caribbean, right? And I decided, what, the concept of the podcast was going to be the idea that it's two people interview me and the people I'm interviewing, and in some instances, me and yourselves having a conversation over drinks like we do in the Caribbean. So obviously, cognac is my drink of choice, and it has a particular ring to it. So, I started playing around with the idea, and that's how the Crypto and Cognac podcast was initially created. In the first season, I thought about, how do I explore new cognacs as I explore new crypto projects and that kind of thing. And I tried a bunch of different cognacs, and every week I would come to the table with a different cognac. But it just didn't feel authentic to me, because ultimately, you guys know Hennessy is my favorite. Hennessy is my drink of choice. So it moved towards Hennessy, but the crypto and Hennessy cognac podcast doesn't really have the same ring to it. So I stuck with the name, the Crypto and Cognac podcast. Obviously, I've made a commitment to, just stick to what I like, right, in terms of my consumption. But, as I really started season after season moving through this experience, I realized that crypto and cognac, and more so Bitcoin and Hennessy, have a lot more synergies, that you would traditionally think, because one, crypto, that is a very, very nascent industry, whereas Cognac has been around for a long time. Hennessy as a Cognac house has been around for a very long time. But like I said, the more I started evaluating the experience of doing the Crypto and Cognac podcast, I started seeing more and more synergies between what Bitcoin is supposed to be and what Hennessy as a brand is. And one of the things that really stood out to me was in terms of consistency. Bitcoin was created, and ever since its creation, it has done what it has promised to do every single day, every single hour, every single week, every single year since its creation. Every 10 minutes, a new block is mined, and it happens like clockwork. We can literally set our clocks around that. We actually have set our clocks around that in terms of the 4-year halving cycle. And that consistency is something that I think is mirrored in Hennessy's experience. One of the things that I loved about Hennessy early on, because I grew up poor, but my dad would have Hennessy every now and then. I mean, he couldn't drink it nearly as much as I do now. But I think Hennessy for me was my first real introduction to luxury. And, I kind of convinced myself that what I was experiencing, whether it was in Tobago, back when I lived there, in Trinidad, and wherever I go to in the world, whenever I experience Hennessy, it was the same Hennessy that, the kings, queens, royalty, presidents, princes, whoever, anywhere else in the world, from the poorest person to the wealthiest person, from the most notoriable person to the least known person, one thing we show is the consistency in that bottle of Hennessy remained the same. We were all drinking the same Hennessy, and I think that is representative of the Bitcoin blockchain experience. No matter who you are, what country you reside in, whether you're a king, whether you're a commoner, whether you're the richest man in the world, or someone tucked away in one of the poorest countries in the world, your experience and your access to Bitcoin was the same. No one was able to benefit greater in terms of a percentage opportunity than the other person. The same percentage growth that the guy who has $1 of Bitcoin has is the same percentage growth that the guy who has $100 million worth of Bitcoin has. And for me, that was a big thing. You know what I mean? And well, of course, we have seen over the last 15, 16 years, Bitcoin continues to get better with age, right? If I don't think it's possible, or I don't think it has happened that anyone has held Bitcoin over a 4.5-year period or a 5-year period and experience a loss, right? Every single 5-year period, the price goes up. It does better and better. And it's just like Hennessy starts out at VS, then goes to VSOP. And as you go higher up the aging process in terms of the expressions, it's the more dynamic and the more valuable that the Cognac gets, right? The next part that I really want to touch on is in terms of the provenance. The provenance is something that we understand in the blockchain space because the transparency, every block is there to be scrutinized by anyone who has access to the blockchain. And that's what gives it its value. The fact that it is immutable, it is transparent, it is accessible, and you can track every single Bitcoin token across the network. And I think when we think about like cognac, it's not something that we think about particularly, but provenance is such a big part of the experience of a cognac, because first of all, you can't even call it cognac if it's not made in a particular part of France, the Cognac region, if it's not made with a particular type of grape, if it's not made in a particular if those grapes aren't grown in a particular soil, and that is what gives the authenticity to the cognac, because outside of that, it's just brandy. Something similar to the difference between champagnes and sparkling wines. So as I got more and more acquainted with, or as I started going more and more through the process of experiencing these two worlds, the crypto world, the cognac world, I started seeing more and more synergies, and it just made it feel to me so much more aligned in terms of my purpose as it relates to this particular journey that I'm on. I mean, thankfully, I could do it in a way that I truly enjoy it. Even when it's just me and Stevie here, I know we're having a drink, we're sharing a drink, we're sharing a conversation. It's something that I love. Doing the podcast keeps me connected to the blockchain space, even when I have, all of other life's pressures pulling me in different directions. It keeps me connected to this community of people, and my opportunities for growth as I continue to grow in my experience as it relates to crypto. I'm able to also similarly experience new opportunities in my cognac journey, and it's something that I truly cherish. You know what I mean? You know, some of you guys would know I would have been a art collector in terms of digital art, in terms of NFTs. One thing you guys may not know is that I'm also a very huge Hennessy collector. I collect all the limited edition bottles of cognac, Hennessy in particular. And, I've been blessed to be able to consume this, at a reasonably comfortable level, and to be able to enjoy it at various levels of its refinement. I don't know if when I was growing up as a young kid in Tobago, sneaking away to have a drink of Hennessy, if I ever thought that I would have the opportunity to really experience, drinking VSOP on a regular, pure white on a regular, VS on a regular, having EXO, having had James Hennessy, Richard Hennessy, being able to have in my collection, Hennessy Paradise, just let me share it with already. All right. You know, being able to, hold one of these guys in my collection, where we went this way, be able to enjoy something at this level. And obviously, hard work has been a major part in it, but I think my journey in blockchain has had a major impact on that as well. So for me, the two things are inseparable. I think my journey through life is going to continue to be characterized by those two things. Obviously, in my personal life, I hope it has a little bit more meaning than just, crypto and cognac. But for you guys out in the public world, yeah, you all know Illuminati, he loves himself some crypto, he loves himself some Hennessy. So that's a little bit about the journey to the Crypto and Cognac podcast. And I'm excited to keep doing this with you guys. Thank you guys, as always, for showing up, for chatting with me, for hearing me babble. And look forward to a lot more discussions this season as it relates to cognac as it relates to Hennessy specifically, in terms of some education around it, because I want everybody to gain an appreciation for it like I do. And I think the more you understand things, the more you can see the value in them. And the same way I feel about crypto, I want you guys to be able to share with me in my cognac experiences as well. So, without further ado, that's my time, guys. As always, be safe, do your own research. It doesn't matter what a stripper tells you, do your own research. Yeah? See you all next week. 𝐿luminati OUT out. Guys, be blessed. Cheers.